Okay? But why do people continue doing grammar translation? It's a failed methodology. Anyone who wants to argue with me that it's a successful methodology is fooling themselves. For every one student who does learn to communicate and learn to communicate well in English, how many tens of thousands of students go through the system and after 6 years or 9 years still can't say more than "this is chalk"? If they know the word chalk. All right? This is not to be an attack on the system. Rather, this is to suggest that we need to take a look at these concepts a little more carefully. And we need to look at what it is that the teachers are doing in the classrooms, and we need to hold them responsible. If the goal is truly communication, then the Ministry of Education in their most recent guideline has said that that is the goal. If that's the goal, then why are we still up here? And why are we not down here? Okay? The teaching of grammar is fine. But let's teach them how to actually use it. Both the correct form of grammar and actually what people actually do. When I write my textbooks, when I write the textbooks that I write, where do you think I am on this spectrum? Textbooks, the textbooks you use in the classes.
The middle?
No. I mean, yes, I pay attention to this stuff somewhat. But I'm much more interested in what we're doing down here. Why? Because if we spend our time, even if we do communication alone and we spend all of our time up in grammar and prescription, when we send our students overseas, or when they graduate, when they go overseas on their own, no one's going to understand them. Okay? This is how I was when I first came to Japan. I took 4 years of Japanese, correct Japanese, mas and des and all the good stuff. And I got here. Nobody uses mas and des. Okay? Everybody shortens everything. All right? So, of course, communication was a bit more difficult for a while. All right? So I'm arguing that don't forget about this stuff. Don't forget about it. It does have its role, it does have its important points, but it's down here that is actually going to achieve the goals we're trying to achieve. Acceptability, descriptive side of things. Okay. Now, there are going to be some people who are going to want to argue that Japan should have its own English, Japanese English. We shouldn't care what the native speakers do. We shouldn't care what's natural in America or in Britain or in Australia. All right. Fair enough. Interesting argument. Next question. It's not something I'm that interested in. I'm interested in it as a tool of communication. The language is a tool of communication. I want my students to be able to communicate. Okay? And if communication is the goal, then we need to be focused on this side of things. Okay? Now, as I said to you before, this stuff is important. But when you take it to an extreme, as I believe is done here in Japan, when you take it to an extreme, what happens? Okay? What happens when we take this to an extreme? Grammar, grammar, grammar. Junior high school, grammar, grammar, grammar. High school, grammar, grammar, grammar. What happens? Anything. Well, yeah, that's one of the effects. That's a big effect. Okay? It's a very good point you just made. Yes, people become afraid to make mistakes. And what do I see? What do you see when you get to your classes? We see a bunch of students sitting there afraid to open their mouths because they're afraid to make a mistake. Not because they don't have something to say. to use a double negative. Okay? But because they're afraid of making mistakes. For so long, they've been told they can't make mistakes in English. Making mistakes in English is natural. I do it all the time. Okay? You make mistakes in Japanese on a daily basis. You probably just don't even realize it. Okay? When I speak Japanese, of course, I make hundreds of mistakes. The Jimu people, they're the fun ones to practice Japanese with. Okay? Because I know if they understand me or not. They understand me as, if they understand me, they say, no, Clanky Sensei, you can't do that. If they don't understand me, it's, okay? All right? I make mistakes. I go back to my office, I think about it again, I go back and I try again. Okay? Now, what happens if you get all of these wonderful grammatical rules? You got all the rules in your head. We put you on an airplane, we put you on JAL. If you arrive safely in Los Angeles, you get off the airplane. What happens? You got all the grammar. What happens? Yeah, that might be a polite way of putting it. Okay. One of my favorite researchers of all time. Delheims. Okay. All right. Delheims in 1974 wrote a book called Foundations in Sociolinguistics. Okay, sociolinguistics, language and culture. And he was sort of fighting against Chomsky. Okay, and I'm not going to get into the big debate about what they were fighting about. But let me just give you a quote from him. It's a very good quote. Himes says, "A child from whom any and all grammatical sentences might come with equal likelihood would be a social monster." Okay. Let me read that again to you. A child from whom any and all grammatical sentences of a language might come with equal likelihood would be a social monster. Okay. He continues, within the social matrix in which it acquires a system of grammar, so as it acquires the grammar, a child also acquires a system of use. A system of use. How to use it. Okay? Now what I'm arguing here is that what happens in Japan is that they acquire the grammar, but they acquire no system of use. Now you can draw your own conclusion about whether that creates a social monster or not. But it's a very interesting, thought-provoking idea. Okay? And I'm arguing that this is precisely what happens up here. Okay? They get done, they've got plenty of grammar, but there's no sense of use. How to use it, when to use it, why to use it at this time. All right? So, let me conclude real quick. All right? I would argue that we need to see a shift down here. Okay? In teacher training programs, we need to teach this stuff. We need to teach what these methodologies actually mean in terms of the results. Okay? Using grammar translation, if we have a minimal success rate, a success rate of 1 in 10,000 or whatever, are we doing justice to our students? Okay? If communication is the goal, as we've argued it is, and as the Ministry of Education has said it is, and I'm not the biggest fan of the Ministry of Education, but they said it, so let's argue that why not? Okay? After all, they control the curriculum, they control the textbooks, and they control everything else. Let's move it down here. Okay. Communicative language teaching by its very nature is going to look at how communication is used. And that's the system that the students actually need. All right? That is my presentation for today. That is Prescriptivism, Descriptivism, Grammaticality, Acceptability, Language Education, and Japan.